Welcome to our lecture 14. This is actually one of the most important lectures, especially it is gonna lead an analytical approach in dealing with political science. We're not only going to mention certain data and information, etc. We're talking about scholars, as we did in the previous lectures. We're going to talk about certain analysis process. We're going to analyze the structure of the institutions that we started to talk about in the previous lecture. In the previous lecture, if you do remember, we talked about separation between power, how we're gonna establish institutions, and we talked about how the separation of power started, all these important elements. Then we end up with certain questions I ask you to search about, but still, there is a missing part talking about the analysis process of this progress or this accumulative effort. That's why we're going to talk about the analysis of these institutions in this lecture. So let's start. Let me only refresh your memories that democracy institutions are tools, are the way to transfer the concepts and the abstract thinking mindset into an implementary level. To consider how far the principles of popular control and political equality shape and inform the institutions and procedures of representative government, we need to define what are here called the meditating values, through which people have sought to give effect to these principles in a country's institutional arrangements and practice. To which level and what are the values that um, motivate people to participate and shape the relation between the institutions and the community in a way. To know more about these values, we need first to do the following. We need to talk about certain principles in this sense. So before talking about the values, let's have a look about the core principles that lay beyond the attitude of people and institutions. Basic principles. Here we are talking about popular control over public decision-making process and decision makers selection itself. We also talk about equality of respect and voice between citizens in the exercise of that control. So we're talking about the procedure itself and the equality of respect. We're going to see various values and we're going to discuss separately each value and comparing each value in separate level. The first meditating value is participation. Let's talk about the requirement of participation as a meditating value. Number one of the requirement would be rights to participate. Number two, the capacity, the resources to participate. Number three is the agencies for participation. Number four, participatory culture. So, whenever we talk about participation, we have four core requirements: the right, the capacity, agenda, and agency. Finally, the culture behind this participation, the tolerance, the participatory culture that people hold. According to the institutional means of realization for participation, number one, we need to have civil and political rights system. Number two, we need to have economic, social, cultural right contexts. Number three, we need to have elections. We need to be able to establish political parties. The existence of NGOs, education, and um, very good awareness from citizens and the idea of citizenship. Number two, or the second value, would be authorizing or authorization. According to the core requirements for authorization, number one would be the validation of constitution. Number two, choose of office holders or programs. Number three, control of elected over non-elected executive persons of officers. According to an institutional means of realization, we need to have, for example, referendums. We need free, fair elections. We need to have systems of subordination to elect officials. So this is part of how we do classify these two values. Let's have a look for other values to take into consideration in this criteria or in this analysis. A third value would be the representation. As we said before, representation, it's not only an idea, it turns to be a tool. So in this sense, let's see what are the core requirements to have this tool, to implement this tool in a professional way and in a way to create the balance we are searching for. Number one, we need to have a legislative representative of main currents of popular opinion. Number two, all public institutions representative of social composition of electorate. On the institutional level, we need to have electoral and party system. A second institutional mean is anti-discrimination laws. The third is affirmative action policies. The fourth value would be accountability. So the core, actually, for create an accountability, we need set of requirements. But here we're going to determine the core requirement, which is clear lines of accountability, legal, financial, political, to ensure effective and honest performance, civil service, and judicial integrity. According to institutional mean, we have rule of law, separation of powers, independent auditing process, legally enforceable standards, strong powers for recruiting legislative authority, etc., etc. The last element here is transparency. Transparency is one of the most critical issues. Like, most of the governments decide what to share, what not to share, and there is no clear, accurate law saying what is the limit of transparency. In spite of that, we managed to determine a core requirement for transparency, which is government open to legislative and public scrutiny and debate. It is like to guarantee the minimum of opening and access of information and data by legislative authority and people. How are we going to implement this? Number one, by having a good, strong parliament as a forum for national debate. Number two, freedom of information laws. Again, it is the right to access information. Number three, independent media. Actually, this is one of the most important things that we're started to raise by the current century, and we're gonna discuss more and more when we reach about talking about the actors of political science. Okay, we reached to the last two values. Value of responsiveness, like it is not only to be there, it also needed to be measurable in the sense of their responsiveness, their attitudes, their interaction. Okay, as a value, responsiveness has certain requirements. The most important requirement of them is accessibility of government to electors and different sections of public opinion and policy formation. implementation, and service delivery. The institutional mean would be systematic, open, and accessible procedures and channels of public cancellation. Also, we might have another institutional mean, such as effective legal redress or local government close to people, for example. The last value we need to talk about is solidarity. Actually, solidarity is one of the most recent values that had been added to the list. Why solidarity? Because it is the tool that could protect the progress and push the community towards for prosperity, especially economic, cultural, and political prosperity. So, in order to establish this solidarity, they were talking about two core elements as requirements. Number one, the tolerance of diversity at home. Number two, support for democratic governments and popular struggles for democracy abroad. The institutional means would be civic and human rights education. Number two, international human rights law. Number three, UN and other agencies, whether international, local, or regional. Number three, international NGOs, IN NGOs that could protect and observe and have the right to support any cases, rights, or problems that could occur. Okay, let's discuss these meditating values. The list of meditating values is largely self-explanatory. Without citizen participation and the rights, the freedoms, and the means to participate, the principles of popular control over government cannot begin to be realized. The starting point of participation is to authorize public representation and representatives or officers through free and fair elections, a choice that reflects a free willing and in a manner which produces a legislative process that is representative of different tendencies of public opinion. If different groups of citizens are treated on an equal footing according to their numbers, then the main public institutions will also be socially representative of the citizen body as a whole. The accountability of all officials, both to the public directly and through the meditating institutions of parliament, the court, the ombudsman, and other watchdog agencies, is crucial if officials are to act as agents or servants of the people rather than as they are the masters or their masters in a way. Without openness or transparency in government, no effective accountability could ever be possible or achievable or applicable ever. Responsive to public needs through a variety of institutions through which those needs can be articulated is a key indication of the level of controlling influence which people have over government. Finally, while equality runs as a principle through all the mediating values, it finds particular expression in the solidarity which citizens of democracies show to those who differ from themselves at home and towards popular struggles for democracy abroad. Much more could be said about each of these meditating values. Perhaps it would be sufficient to clarify the distinguish between the idea of accountability and responsive manner, since they are frequently confusing. Accountability involves office holders being required to account for actions they have taken after they have taken them, with the realistic prospect of appropriate uh, sanctions being applied in the event of misconduct, neglecting, or failure. Responsiveness, on the other hand, involves having systematic procedures for consulting public opinion and relevant interests before policy or legislation is decided, so that as content will reflect the views of those affected by it. Both responsiveness and accountability are necessary for effective popular control over government. Democracy, then, begins with a set of principles or regulative ideal, and only then come to institutional argument or arrangements and procedure through which these principles are realized. Although these arrangements and procedures form the subject of our assessment, as in the framework set out below, the criteria against which they are to be assessed are the core principles themselves and the mitigating values of accountability, responsiveness, representative, and so on. It is these that determine how democratic we should judge our institutional arrangement to be. Okay, let's move to another level. Let's assess the quality of democracy progress in general. Okay, let's talk about column number one, citizenship, law and rights. Number one, nationhood and citizenship. Is there public arrangement on a common, for example, citizenship without discrimination? Uh, the role of law and access to justice. Are state and society constantly subject to the law? Question number three, civil and political rights. Are civil and political rights equally guaranteed for all? Number four, economic and social rights. Are economic and social rights equally guaranteed for everyone? Let's talk about representative and accountable government. We have also here three main questions. Number one, do elections give the people control over government and their policies? Number two, does the party system assess the working of democracy? Number three, is government effective in serving the public and responsive to its concerns, needs, maybe? Let's talk also about civil society and popular participation. The media in a democratic society. Do the media operate in a way that sustains democratic values? Let's talk about political participation. Is there full citizen participation in the political life? And what do we mean actually by political participation? Number three, according to civil society and popular participation, decentralization of decision-making process, how these processes were derived, and to which level of government is involved, which is most appropriate for the people affected, for example. Another column we need to talk about is the democracy beyond the state. external influences on the country's democracy. The impact of external impact and external influences like war, like financial issues, financial crisis. Another question, the country's democratic impact abroad. Do the country international policies contribute to strengthening the global democracy or vice versa? What kind of relation that the country has with their neighbors and the global system in general? Another important element here, we need to talk about the representative and accountable value. Uh, we have three extra questions. Question number one, the democratic effectiveness of parliament. To which degree having this representative body is effective? Does the parliament or legislative body contribute effectively to the democratic process, to the development of the community? Number two, uh, civilian control over the military and policy making. This is one of the most controversial and dilemmatic issues that who's supposed to be the upper hand, the militarian or the civilian power in the community? A third question would be the integrity in public life. Is integrity in the conduct of public life implemented? Does it occur in a very obvious way on very several levels? Okay, after asking ourselves all these questions, we need to reach a point where we need to talk about the assessment question in general. We need to ask ourselves or to talk about the laws, to examine the laws that control and govern the citizenship, the eligibility methods, policies. We need to judge the practice and the negative indicators. Uh, we need like to have three questions about political order. Anyone who is studying uh, political order and political science have wondered first how relatively enduring political order emerge in maintaining and changing, and how disorder, violence, and other extreme role are avoided. They have asked what are the certain procedures for political order and under what condition is the political authority at all. They have also asked what are the process through which actors can perform in the best practice. A second question had been inquired: what kinds of political orders are there and what kinds can there be? What are the distinctive characteristics, organizing principles, and identify the different polities across political communities and time? The third question would be the functioning and consequences of political order to be examined. Institutions have been collective and distributive effects. They enable collective actions, government, and create mutual advantage. They also systematically favor some social groups and types of behavior and create distributional conflicts, winners and losers. Uh, an enlightenment-inspired democratic version is that political order and authority stem from the people as the ultimate source of legitimacy. Communities can be understood and influenced, and citizens can make history and design the institutions under which they want to be governed. The democratic vision is consistent with the most common answer to why individual or collective actors voluntarily enter the organization. They organize because they together can solve some problem better or with less effort or expenses than they can achieve by themselves. Generally, an interpretation of political development as the choice of perfection of the human institutions is problematic. There's institutional interior and institutional dilemma reflecting the historical experience of community. They take time to root and they are often difficult to change. Organizational structure and institutional ideologies are forged through historical processes and certain successive efforts to match normative principles and casual habits to experience. Uh, let's talk about balance between unity and diversity. The quality of democratic institutions depend on their success in balancing unit and diversity, system coordination, and unit autonomy. That is the ability to act in uh, coherent and unified, prosperful way, and at the same time respect and accommodate legitimate diversity and conflicts. Historically, it has been argued that political order depends on social and cultural homogeneity. To which level this is okay or acceptable, it is a huge argue that I need you at least to have a glimpse upon. Again, students of political organization have argued that a polity constitutes solely on the base of uh, implementation, calculating expected utility and power balance. So that the legitimacy of political order depends only on its contribution to achieving immediate collective policy benefits will be too contingent and circumstances. A polity is likely to be more stable if it's also glued together by a collective identity. And this is one of the most important things you need also to learn about. Uh, Again, we're talking about the practical level, so you're gonna find a huge information, a lot of data, a lot of details. I just need you to highlight the core general idea, then you might illustrate it more by your own selves. Thank you so much for joining me in this class. Please be safe and be ready for our next journey together. Till I see you, be safe.